It's particularly appropriate that we start talking about the Israeli contribution to the Ecopotential project here in stable care in the central Negev highlands. And I'm particularly standing right next to the tomb of David Ben-Gurion and Paula Ben-Gurion, who was the first Prime Minister of Israel, and his wife. Ben-Gurion saw the Negev as the huge potential for this area to develop. Development has occurred parallel to that perception. We have only a small amount of the population of Israel lives here. There are also a large Bedouin population that lives here, and there's a lot of encouragement from the central government to try to move population down to the Negev and look for unique land uses. So between all of those uses, the different populations, the tourism aspect, the army, the Bedouin activity, all of that results in a lot of conflicting land uses, especially conflicting with the desire to preserve the natural environment and the natural ecosystem. And that's one of the central messages of the Ecopotential project here.
The main aim was to better understand how the human settlements impact the protected areas and how can we, by better management, minimize this impact, and moreover, to better give a quantified measure of this impact on the wildlife, and from that to better understand the range and the magnitude of these impacts on the protected areas.
Ecologists usually measure different variables in a local space. Our research upscales this to a regional and even continental and global scales. We took a series of 30 years of satellite images in order to look for the changes that has been derived by human activities in different places in the area. When we are using a series of satellite images, we can detect and process the changes that occur on the Earth.
We can check on the ground whether there's an ecological impact next to that patch of trees or next to that Bedouin community or that Jewish farm, but the satellite imagery helps us scale up and understand if that impact that we're looking at is really constricted to a very small spatial area, or maybe it's much larger and much more extensive.
We have used several measurements of vegetation and biomass, which measures the amount of the photosynthesis activity of the vegetation.
Among many things that we learned are, for example, that around the human settlements, there is a degradation of the soil due to overgrazing of the herds. However, in a natural reserve, there is an increase of the vegetation cover along the years.
This gives us a meaningful insight into our management and gives us a better explanation to the planning committees in the country how these settlements impact the wildlife, impact the ecosystem, and how can we minimize this impact.
Among the ecological variables that Ecopotential is monitoring are ecosystem services. And ecosystem services are defined as the benefits that people get from nature and from functioning ecosystems. In the very arid desert, one would think that we have few ecosystem services because ecosystem services are based on biodiversity and productivity. But we actually do have quite a few services, primarily those that control the flow of water and redirect water and nutrients with them to areas where it concentrates these resources so there can be plants that grow in the desert, for instance. The plants, of course, are the base of the food chain that later supplies insects and birds and mammals and larger mammals. So those ecosystem services are very important. We also have cultural ecosystem services. The desert is a place for tourism, for spirituality, for aesthetic enjoyment, and that's actually what I do in my research. My role in the Ecopotential project is looking at cultural ecosystem services in the Negev highlands. And in particular, what I was researching was aesthetic preferences for different landscapes. Essentially, we wanted to know what both residents and tourists thought about the different changes that were occurring on the landscape, including different types of residential settlement, different types of development infrastructure, and also changes like this one, like the liman where we're sitting in, which is a grove of artificially planted trees. Most of the population is ambivalent or even prefers additions to the landscape, especially when it's adding additional areas with water or greenery or shade to the landscape. On the other hand, it may mean that if we want to preserve landscapes and try to prevent future disturbances on the landscape, then we're going to have to teach people about the beauty of nature. I think the implications of the research are that we have to balance the aesthetic preferences of people who live and visit here with the ecological impact. And if we balance those two, then maybe we can take a small step towards sustainable management of the region that also provides benefits to humans who want to use the landscape and appreciate certain aesthetic environments, and on the other hand, protect the biodiversity and the natural ecosystem.